This is April 13th,
13.
Wednesday meeting of the Community Preservation Act Committee. Please let me tell you that you're being recorded according to the governor's order of March 12th. And I'll take a roll call to determine if we have a quorum. Eloise Sauls
Here.
and Carolyn McDonald
Here.
and MJ
Here.
and Tim Wheeler. We have a quorum. That's
Oh,
good.
James Holyoke's here too.
Oh, James Holyoke.
I'm here. Don't forget me.
Look at him in the dark.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
I'm here.
All right, do we have a quorum? Do we have a motion to accept the minutes from our last 3 meetings?
Three
So moved.
meetings, yes.
So move.
And a second? And any discussion, omissions, or corrections that anybody wants to recognize? All right, we'll do a roll call on that. Carolyn,
Aye.
MJ,
Aye.
Eloise,
Aye.
James, thank you.
Aye.
I talked to Stuart today from the collaborative, and he had some interesting thoughts about a number of things. But one was that unlike many warrant articles, the Community Preservation Act Committee has a tremendous amount of authority, and that no article can be dealt with at town meeting unless we recommend it.
Correct.
And because these 2 warrant articles have been modified since we submitted them on our behalf, we need to recognize those modifications and approve them. Otherwise, technically, they can't be acted upon at town meeting. So, Carolyn, can you pull up those 3 articles? Can you share?
I can. So to remind
me
me
to-
which,
It's 21, 22, and 23 from that
Oh, yeah.
packet they sent
Yep,
us, so.
yep.
Um,
I can find that.
so we had to modify the way in which the articles were funded. And although we submitted one article for CPA funding for the open space, at some point, it was decided to attach to it language that involved other sources of funding. And Stuart said to me today, you don't have to, as a committee, honor that request. You can say this article has to stand the way we gave it to you. That's our recommendation. Now, we won't do that, but going forward, I think it's important for us to know that.
Sure.
The other thing that Stuart said, and let me find the language. Well, Carolyn's bringing up that other article.
Yeah, I will do that in a sec. I just want to catch up on the minutes a little bit here about what you just said.
So, oh, look at that. Great.
Okay. Sure. Hold on one sec. That's the article I want to share.
So Stuart sent me a memo about DOR guidance on CPA. Self-help funds deposited in the CPA fund. And it was to the town of Boxford. in which case they were raising some money. In our opinion, the language in the vote is not necessary because the CPA fund would be credited with any self-help reimbursement grants for a land acquisition financed by CPA fund financing source. Anyway, the grant statute specifically provides that any reimbursement for an acquisition financed by CPA funds has to be returned to the CPA account. So any reimbursement from grants the town receives from this project must be deposited in the CPA fund. This is clear from both the CPA legislation and the DOR Section 7 of CPA. Shows that any funds received for CPA projects must be deposited in the CPA fund.
May I suggest that you send that document to the selectmen, the town administrator, and the finance committee?
I'm going to, but I wanted to chat with the committee first. And I want to look at the particular article. So if you scroll, we'll go to, I think it's 23 is.
Yep.
the one
Right,
we
just
want.
for the record, combining the 3 warrant articles was not my idea.
Right,
Town council.
I thought
Either
it
on
would
there,
flow better.
is that, so town council came up with it or the select board came up with it?
I don't know who came up with it, but the intent was, because first, I think like they were like Article 18 and 19, and then the other one was like 24 or something. So they
Right.
thought grouping them would be advantageous.
Good to know.
I have a question in regards to what you're saying, Tim, about the statute requires the money go back to CPA anyways. Is that the case regardless of how much CPA is funding a project? If, say, for example, we were only providing 10% of the fund, does that apply? Does it? Because it seems sort of, I would question how that would apply if it's a completely CPA funded project or whether it's the CPA is throwing, a little money at it.
yeah. My understanding is that it ends up coming to CPA. So town council, KP Law has worked with other towns. And in one case, there was a motion on the floor to have the reimbursement go to free cash rather than to CPA. And the town council from KP Law said, the way the statute reads that enacts CPA, and the judgment of DOR is that that's not the way the money can flow. So in this case, there's, as you can see, 48,000 from open space from 2022. So that's money that we've collected this year, because this is fiscal 22 that we're in. The money that we've collected is greater than we anticipated. So if we really were able to dedicate 10% of the money we've generated this year to CPA for open space, it would be a larger number than 48,000. But in the town meeting action a year ago, we established a CPA budget for 2022 based on revenue that we'd received in fiscal 21. And that number was the 490,000, 480,000. And that's why we end up with 10% being 48,000. And that's the amount of money that's available from fiscal 22 to be applied to this warrant article that we're talking about for town meeting on May 2nd. The money that's in the budgeted reserve from 22 is again the amount that we voted at the annual town meeting less the 31,000 that we slid off and gave to, that went to recreation in
Last
the
year.
articles that we did in the fall. So that's why that number is 283 or whatever it is. In order to make the 350,000 that CPA wanted to put into the hopper, we ended up only being able to draw from fiscal 23. And that's from the 10% match essentially for fiscal 23 that's voted on in Article 21 is 54,000. 56,000.
Even though we actually have the additional funds.
So the 56 is based on what our true revenue is going to be for fiscal 22. Actually, it's probably going to be even a little greater than that, but that's a reasonable number to assume that's going to be available next year. So we're stealing 17,000 from that 56 in this warrant article that
Right.
we're writing for the Conservation Commission.
So I was actually in watching the minutes the other day. I kind of was trying to ask this question before. So at town meeting last year, we estimated that our 10% estimated and allocated $48,000
Right,
to each of the 10%.
right.
What we actually brought in was like 580,000, let's just say for round numbers.
Okay,
So we could have, so that is, the 48,000 was $10,000 short of what 10% actually is,
right.
right?
Yep.
So how does that $10,000 get allocated to the proper places?
So I talked to Stuart about that today because I said, you've always said to me that there may be variances from what was allocated and what actually was realized.
Mhm.
And if that's the case, do we make adjustments at some point? And he said, generally, it's not significant enough to make that kind of difference. And you can internally recognize it and, you know, slide money that's in the budgeted reserve into projects that would support open space or recreation or whatever. But he said, in this particular year, a lot of towns are significantly over in terms of what they expected. So he went to DOR and said, what do you want us to do? And DOR said, we probably don't want 180 towns to try to figure out how to put articles on their warrant that would make those adjustments to each of those accounts. Because every single article in every single town is going to be different because the amounts are all different. And so he said, they said, let it ride. You know, just work with your budgeted amount and, you know, be aware of the fact that more money could have been available. But he said this coming year, and we got a memo the other day that said anticipated revenue for this next fiscal year is going to be less than what they got this last time around. And we're, of course, budgeting, assuming that the 58 would be followed up in fiscal 22 to fiscal 23. Because we're over, you know, I'm still confident, I guess, because we're carrying some money forward from this year into next year. So I feel like there's some cushion there, but it is something for us to be aware of anyway.
It's sloppy bookkeeping.
he said today that he was talking to someone a couple years ago, and they said Massachusetts is the only state that allows you, that won't allow you to, well, that allows you to spend money that you don't have, but won't allow you to spend money that you do have. So in other
Yeah,
words,
the whole thing is just backwards.
we're spending money.
Based on-
We're not spending as much as we have this year. And as a result, we're spending some that we're anticipating from next year that we don't have yet. So in order to come up with this particular article's funding, but that's just the way it is. So.
As someone who's done bookkeeping for a long time, it like makes me like vibrate a little bit.
Yeah.
Because it should be in November, we find out how much we get. And at the next town meeting, we decide how to allocate what we got.
Right.
It should be the other way around.
Yeah.
Instead of
I-
us.
I'd just be happier if we could make a warrant article that said, okay, you are going to spend 10% of. this money,
Exactly.
whatever that 10. So, Tim, if I understand correctly, the way this worked, if, say, for this past year, because we got more, our different buckets are at, say, 8% and 10%. Nobody in the state cares that we have failed to hit the 10%.
That's the way I interpret what Stuart said. There,
Uh,
I mean, the requirement to meet the 10%, no one's going to be coming to us and saying, you didn't put all the money that you were required to put into that account when you should have. You didn't make the adjustments. So he said, essentially, that money gets placed in the fund balance at the end of the year when June settles the books from fiscal 22. And it's going to show as money that we have, so we're not losing it. And I think, as I said, we'll be aware of the fact that if the rec committee, let's say the historical commission wanted X amount of money and it exceeded the 10% that we showed on the books, I think we'd feel all comfortable about taking some out of the fund balance or the budgeted reserve and boosting it up based on what we feel 10% would have been.
Sure.
So, it's just something for us to be aware of. But so in this article, that's where those three figures come from. 48 is what we allocated in May of 21 for fiscal 22. That's all we can spend. The budgeted reserve amount, again, that was from fiscal 22, voted on in 21 and reduced slightly because of the money that we already applied to the rec committee project. And then the 17 is money that's coming from fiscal 23. And we've said to the select board and other folks, our goal is not to expend money from the year we're in whenever it's possible. But because of the way in which these budgets work, we're forced to do that in order, I think, to recognize the amount that really should be available to these entities. Because if you look at the 17 and in the earlier article that goes to the Historic Commission, basically it's 48. I mean, we got 51,000, I think we're asking for from this next year. And, if you think about it, 51,000 is less than the extra amount of money that we generated in fiscal 22. So we're really only spending about the amount of money that we generated. So we're not really exceeding the amount in true dollars. We're just exceeding it in terms of the way we account for it. So, and so if we look at Article 22, we see 48,000 from fiscal 22, and we're using 51 out of the 56 that's available from fiscal 23. And that's how we come up with the 100,000 that they're seeking at this point.
Right. So theoretically, I mean, not in actual numbers as we just discussed, but on paper, they're spending their 10% for fiscal 23 on this project.
Right.
Right.
Now, if the money that is reimbursed to the town for the open space, if you receive some of that, that comes in over the course of the year, and that replenishes essentially the budgeted reserve amount. You know, we'll have to think about how that might be allocated. Somebody might very well be looking for funding for a project in the fall. And we're going to have to sort out what's actually available. I mean, housing would certainly have all their funds available, and the Conservation Commission and Rec would have everything in their kitty but the 17. And we haven't dipped into any of the budgeted reserve that we've set aside. So theoretically, that would be available in for a fall town meeting.
Right. So did you confirm that with Stuart?
That we could do that.
Yeah,
We've
there was
we've-
some question.
We've talked about that, and you know, so I focus more on this town meeting than I did on a potential fall one, but because there is the question of the additional funds that come in. I didn't ask him anything about that. If there's
Right, because
reimbursement to the town and that money comes to CPA, is that tied up until
we can allocate it at the next town meeting.
24, or is there an opportunity to do something with it in 23 at a fall town meeting?
Right.
So that's something that we can do some more research on as the year goes on.
Right. So does the allocations have to happen only at annual town meeting?
You're supposed to
thought
put
that
your
was
budget
just
together. You're supposed to put your budget together at the annual, but I mean, we certainly made allocations last fall. But that was based on money that was available from 22. So we could certainly do articles in the fall of 23 that utilized any of the funds that we'd budgeted for 23, whether they're in
Yeah, no,
the
my
balanced reserve.
question is, let's say we get $600,000 in reimbursement.
Yeah,
And that money gets put in our account in October,
right.
or we know it's going to be put in our account before the end of the fiscal year 2023.
Right.
Do we have to allocate those funds, even if we just allocate it to the budgeted reserve in order to be able to spend it?
Right now, I'd say that money's probably tied up until we get to fiscal 24, and that it would
Right. Or could we have an article on a fall town meeting allocating that money to budgeted unreserved or whatever we decide to do with it? So that, and then we could have, that's earlier on the warrant, and then have articles further down on the warrant after that's allocated to budgeted reserve that then uses those funds.
right. Good question. I'll find out,
Cool.
because that may very well be what transpires, and we'll want to know what we can do, because people are
Right.
going to start asking us about the fall town meeting, and well, the Ag Commission still wants to do something with their fence, and Rec wants to do some stuff with
The
that
playground.
playground and stuff. So
Yeah.
And there will be money in the budgeted reserve, so there is the possibility that even without realizing the funds that come in possibly from a matching reimbursement, well, a reimbursement from the state. It's a reimbursement as opposed to a match, right?
It is a reimbursement as opposed to a match, correct?
So does that, so Eloise, you're right. We're going to send this information to the select board.
And finance committee.
Carolyn, do you want to chat about the 100,000 from free cash and how that article addresses some of that?
I
And
mean,
you've got another article too, right? Is that,
no, they put all three of them into one.
okay,
Right, so this, so the part, so the parts of this article are, the first part is authorizing us to purchase the land. The next part is to allow us to apply for the land grant. The next part is to appropriate the total 1.525 million, of which is required for the land grant. This part we need to appropriate the whole thing. The next part is to allow us to, so this next part is a little controversial. Margaret and I talked a couple of times back and forth about this. So this is the part that says if we get money back as a reimbursement, that free cash would get paid first, of which you just explained a little while ago that cannot happen under the way CPA laws are written. But it does say to the extent consistent with the law. So I don't know if we just leave that in there or if we try to do something to correct that at town meeting.
Well-
Tim,
yeah.
how much do we have in undesignated balance?
None.
Enough said. Thank you.
We've either put it in budgeted reserve or each of the accounts.
Okay, how much do we have in budgeted reserve?
The amount that we're given here, the 283, 724, 25.
Okay,
Right. So, but I'll get back to the free cash thing in a minute. And then this last, then this last part, to authorize town administrator, select board to enter. So this allows us to enter into an agreement with Sudbury Valley trustees to buy the land and to execute the conservation restriction, I believe is what this. Yeah, the perpetual conservation restriction on said properties. Right. So the $100,000, we may not actually even need that. Sudbury Valley trustees has been awarded an additional grant for $75,000 towards this purchase. So that's already $75,000 that we won't have to pay Sudbury Valley trustees. So now we're at between the 50,000 that they've the 50,000 that they've guaranteed, we don't have to, that they'll raise as fundraising, and the 75 of that 100,000 they have received a grant for that, so we won't have to pay that. But in this document, in this vote, all of the money needs to be allocated in order for us to be able to apply for the land grant. So I can't take that out now that we won't have to pay 75 of that. And maybe even more. They've also been invited to apply for another grant for 75,000. So, you know, unfortunately, the fluid nature of how all of this funding has happened and the timing of when the article needed to be in, when we need to do this, when we're going to find out about things. Right now, this $100,000 for free cash is on paper.
Right.
Should we need any of that money, the Conservation Commission has voted to that future Solomon Pond Mall funds will be used to pay back whatever we end up needing from free cash. Of which there is, so June, something happened. I don't think an audit is the exact right word, but there, the state came in and looked at the way we were doing our books. And for whatever reason, the mitigation money from Solomon Pond Mall that used to always just get deposited into our open space account now has to get voted on at town meeting to be put in our open space account. So let's say we wind up taking $25,000 in free cash, needing $25,000 from free cash. And Solomon Pond Mall actually pays us our $50,000 next year. They paid on time this year, but they did not last year pay on time. At town meeting, there is the opportunity to vote that 25,000 of that goes to free cash and 25,000 goes into our open space account. Does that make sense to everybody?
Can you add that to the motion?
I did add it to the summary. Let's see if that survived all of the machinations. I did have it here in the summary at one point that we voted to pay free cash back. Doesn't look like that made it.
Has that already been sent to the printer?
I do believe.
I didn't think so.
If it
Now,
hasn't, I would love to add that line in.
the motions, Eloise, they're going to print the motions, right?
Mhm.
Separately from the warrant?
Yeah.
And the
They always-
motions,
They always print the motion separately from the warrant.
but I'm saying, are those going to be distributed to people that night?
I almost think so.
I got that impression from Barry today. And because he was saying there isn't an explanation for the historical commission's article because it was more complex than they were able to put package at the time. And they were changing some language. So he said, well, you need to do that in a timely fashion because the explanations are going to be attached to the motions. And the motions, it sounded like with the explanations were going to be distributed to everybody at town meeting. So Carolyn, there may be a chance to.
Well, that might be something. Tim, are you planning to attend the Selectmen's Coffee Talk on April 26th?
No, I'm being retired from the bank that night.
Ah,
I am attending Coffee Talk.
Wonderful.
well, Well, then you can just ask,
But I think get in touch with Barry now.
yeah,
and
maybe
say-
if you have to print something, it'd be better to have historical on one side and community preservation on the other.
Yeah, well, I think it's gonna be part of the whole warrant too. I mean, the whole motions. And distributed with all the explanations. So Stuart said today, you have to pay someone the 1,250,000 before the state will give you your reimbursement.
Yeah, you have to have title to the land.
Well, if Sudbury Valley takes title to the land, they would use money that wasn't, whose money are they going to use?
What do you mean? Whose money is Sudbury Valley trustees gonna use to buy the land?
Yeah,
Their own.
and then we have to write a check to Sudbury Valley for the full amount before the state will reimburse us the full amount.
Well, that would give us title.
I'm just saying,
Right,
in order for us to write a check for the 1.25 million,
right. So what you're saying is that we would actually need to take that 100,000 out of free cash.
right? And that's what Stuart said to me today.
Right,
He said, I don't see how you get around not using that because you physically have to purchase before the state will reimburse.
sure. And
Now,
yeah.
If Sudbury Valley says, we already have 125,000 in hand, you only need to give us a check
For that less,
for that less.
right,
And then we've got title.
then we haven't,
We haven't
Hmm.
expended the free cash, have we?
we have not, but how do we then satisfy the 1.25 million canceled check?
Well, are you gonna give them a check? Are you gonna give Sudbury Valley a check for 1.25 if they've already generated money that's come to them? Aren't they telling you that your check to them only needs to be
Yes, but if what you're saying is that we need to expend all of the money to get the grant. So maybe Sudbury Valley trustees then gives us back somehow.
Have they already bought the land?
They have an option to purchase. And the option, they have to purchase the land by the end of August.
Okay, but if we've raised all the money, why wouldn't we just hand Sudbury Valley, here's a check for 1.2, you complete the purchase, that way we have a valid check to send to the state, see, we paid for it.
Right. And yes, that is. But I think what Tim is saying is if they're saying. We're gonna buy the land. But we've already got some of this money towards the purchase price. You don't have to give us a check for all of it. And they have to have thought this through because they're hand in hand with us on applying for the grants. So they've got to have a way.
Well, check with that first.
Yeah. Yes.
So regardless, this is the way the article is going to be presented. And we need to take action tonight to approve it as written in order for it to go forward.
Right. Yeah, I'm not super, I think having it all in one almost makes it more confusing. It may give better flow to the overall meeting, but it makes the article very confusing.
Yeah, I agree.
Um,
And that's what Stuart said was, in the future, if you as a committee can say, we won't approve this article and it can't go on the warrant if you don't like the way it's written. And he
Right.
said, if you're uneasy about it, don't hesitate to ever call him. And because he says DOR often is not going to put anything in writing. And his experience with some of the law firms that are out there is that they don't understand CPA fluidly enough to help a town figure out how to write the article either. So
right,
We have the ability to approve it in language town council didn't like and say, tough, this is going on the warrant, or are they able to say, no, we don't like the language? Like, who wins that sort of metaphorical pissing contest?
it can't be voted on unless we recommend it.
But if town council is unhappy with certain language and we feel that language is necessary,
Then
can
you
we
do,
force it onto the warrant against town council?
then
recommendation?
you get 10 registered voters to do a article. And that has to go on the town warrant and it cannot be altered.
Yeah.
right. So I think, but MJ, in reality, what would happen is we would say, we would negotiate with town council. We would say, okay, we want this to be a standalone article, or we want, this part is important to us. And they say, okay, well, if this part's important, then you also need to put this part or take this part out. Like, it would be a negotiation so that we would make sure we were putting something legal on there, but also satisfied our needs. Does that seem right, Tim?
Yeah, and the other thing is that we had these articles, our articles submitted, 6 weeks ago. And
Yeah.
town council didn't begin to look at them until about 3 weeks ago. And we didn't get town council's response back until 10
2
days
weeks
ago.
ago.
Yeah,
Yeah,
10
exactly.
days.
Right.
So
And
I think what the lesson is for us is that we should request that articles that we're putting together get processed through town council far sooner than, as soon as we turn them over,
Yeah, in February.
they need to go to town council, because it's not as though the selectmen need to approve we've approved these articles. That's what is necessary for them to be processed at a town meeting.
right,
So-
right, because if we approve them, the select board can't then choose to not approve them, correct?
Right. It doesn't
Right.
make any difference.
Right,
They can decide not to recommend it. The finance committee can decide not to recommend it, but action can be taken based on what we recommended. So
right,
it's a little different type of article, is what Stuart was saying to me today. It's not your run-of-the-mill article that usually expends money that has to go through finance committee and get their approval and the selectmen and all that sort of stuff. It's really an independent type of funding source.
Margaret might challenge your interpretation.
Who?
Margaret.
Well, yeah,
Well,
but
I'm just saying, she wanted capital planning to pass on it, which I am a member of.
I think that's great, but you can't overturn it, is what we're saying. You can't say, no, this can't go on the warrant, or because capital planning doesn't approve of it.
right. Capital planning can also vote to not support it,
Right, yeah.
but that doesn't
So
mean
it
it
was a
doesn't go on the
helpful,
warrant.
it was a helpful conversation with Stuart.
Good.
So how are we Do we need to talk about these three articles anymore at this point? Are we,
I would make a motion that we accept Article 21, 22, and 23 as written in the warrant.
Second,
and is there any further discussion that anybody wants to have? So we'll do a roll call on this. MJ
Aye.
and Eloise
aye.
and Carolyn
Aye.
and Tim is aye. So that's a vote and that's good.
Where's James?
He dropped off a little bit ago.
Hmm.
Oh,
Eloise, you and I. So on this, so Carolyn, you're going to develop an explanation that may have different language than what's on here right now, and you'll talk to Barry about that. And
Yep.
I'll advise June, because she had a meeting tonight with Barry and Janet about their article, and there was discussion about there needing to be a explanation promptly developed so that can be incorporated into something that's delivered to the folks at town meeting. So I'll make some general comments about CPA like I did last time. And then the articles will get presented by the entities that are,
it requested it.
yeah, right?
Yeah.
Carolyn's happy about that.
Yeah, I actually, I asked Margaret, I'm like, so do I have to read this whole thing? She said, and so I have to ask Barry about that too, because sometimes he'll say, you know, as printed in the warrant.
Right.
So I'm hoping that
I think
someone
he'll
will
accept
take a
that.
little bit of pity on me and allow some sort of something like that to happen.
I think he'll do that.
Yeah.
Because I think they plan to do that with the housing trust, and I think there's a couple other things, so. Yeah.
Right, that are just really long.
So I'll reach out to Margaret and let her know that we've approved these articles again as rewritten. And I'll relay to she and the finance committee and everybody the comments that Stuart's made about the article. And maybe if Sudbury Valley wants to I can give you the language that did I send you the, yeah, I did. I sent you, Carolyn, the language. You may want to share that with Sudbury Valley trustees.
From Stuart.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good. Eloise, you and I talked about, the committee was appointed in November of 2020.
Correct.
And there were two people for a one-year term, two people for a two-year term, and three people for a three-year term, I think.
But I was not appointed in November of 2020.
That's right.
I
But you were
attended the
appointed,
meetings, but I wasn't,
right? But you were appointed for a two-year term.
yes, I was.
So Eloise and I have talked about this. If indeed the appointments were made in November and it was a one-year term, that means that the term would have ended in November. But usually selectmen make appointments on or around the annual
The
town
end of
meeting.
May or sometimes the end of June.
Right. So that being the case, my goal is to argue that the two individuals that were appointed for a one-year term which were, I looked at that a minute ago. What did I, it was MJ and James were appointed for 1 year. I'm going to interpret that as through May of or June of 2022. And that,
20 yeah,
that
There you
the
go.
two of you, James and MJ, need to be, if you're willing, reappointed at that time. And you're the two at-large members. So MJ, are you happy enough with us that you'd like to be reappointed?
I would be happy to be reappointed. yeah.
I love it. Don't we love it, huh?
Yes, we do. Thank you.
Thank you, MJ.
thank you. Yes, thank you.
And I'll reach out to James and verify that he'd like to be reappointed. And then I'm just going to say to the selectmen that their two appointments need to be upped when they normally do appointments for all the committees that they're involved with, whenever that is, late May, early June, whatever.
Right.
And then
then
the-
all of the appointments should be that.
Yeah,
When they
and then,
do their annual appointments.
Yeah.
and then the 2-year appointments will be up in May of 23. And that, I think, is Eloise and Julie. And then the next term is 24, and that would be Conservation, you, Carolyn, and me, and the Historical Commission, but they'll be appointing someone for that unfilled position sooner rather than later, I hope. But I wanted, are people comfortable with that approach?
I am.
Yep.
Okay, because
Yeah, I
usually when you
think-
get if you get appointed, Eloise, it's till you're reappointed or until someone else is duly, whatever, right?
That's only if you're elected.
Oh,
You're
okay,
elected, for an elected to leave, they're supposed to wait till somebody else has been duly elected and sworn, then they're free to go.
and so
And
for,
appointed, once your term ends, that's it. It's over.
okay,
Right. And if you're in an appointed position, this at least seems to hold for conservation seats, that if you take the seat of somebody who has left, that you finish their term before being reappointed.
Usually.
okay.
So I guess my question would be that it would be like in our case for historical. If a new person came on, they would finish Elaine's term.
Right,
Right. Okay.
Yeah, Kyle's term was up this May anyway.
on the Historical Commission,
Correct.
yeah. Yeah, I guess Janet's is too, isn't it? Okay, that
All
was
right.
housekeeping. What I'll probably do is we'll post a meeting for the committee the night of town meeting. In case some crazy thing happens and we need to act somehow. So I'll make sure that that gets posted.
Okay.
Anything else we need to accomplish this evening?
I was curious if we have gotten applications for the position. for
We
the-
have one, and I've spoken to Margaret, and she's been so busy with stuff that she was gonna send me the standard series of questions that the Personnel Committee developed that has to be, you have to, whatever you do, whoever you interview, you have to ask them, whoever the candidate is, the same questions. So there's some standardized ones, and then there's a couple that we'd probably develop for this committee. So we have one applicant, and I'm gonna reach out to them and say, we're running a little behind schedule because we had talked about interviewing people right about now and hiring somebody for the middle of April or so, but it's running slower than we'd want anyway. And James said that he would be willing to sit in on an interview. I'll check with him and see if that's still the case. If it's not, I may reach out to somebody else and see if Margaret said she would participate. But I haven't chased her to, because I thought she'd do it virtually through Zoom probably. But I thought it'd be good to have her there.
Right. One of the things that we were hoping for was to have someone before town meeting so they could be involved in that process. And
Right.
the applicant actually is a resident, so.
Yeah.
That's not quite as crucial.
Right. Good. Anything else?
I think I would be happy to make a motion to adjourn.
Second,
All right, that's not debatable. So Carolyn,
Aye.
MJ,
aye.
Eloise,
Aye.
you can close your office, Eloise. It's 9 o'clock.